My name is Rebecca Hale, and until recently I never imagined I would share a story like this in public. I am a licensed hospice nurse from Oregon, trained to stay calm when bodies fail, to speak gently when families fall apart, and to trust what can be measured, monitored, and charted. For most of my adult life, faith lived quietly in the background. It was something I respected, something I returned to in moments of loss, but not something I spoke about openly. What happened to me changed that. For a long time I tried to keep this experience private. Not because I was ashamed, but because some truths feel too fragile to rush into noise. But as the months passed, a quiet conviction grew inside me, that remaining silent would be a greater mistake than being misunderstood. This is not a story meant to frighten you. It is not a prediction, and it is not a warning. It is a reminder. The night everything began was February 3, 2025. It was winter in the Pacific Northwest, the kind of winter that seeps into your bones without ever announcing itself. Rain pressed steadily against the windows of the hospice unit, soft but relentless, like time itself. The hallways were dim, washed in muted amber light, and the air carried that familiar blend of antiseptic and quiet grief. I had been on shift for nearly 11 hours. Hospice work teaches you how thin the line is between holding on and letting go. That night, I moved from room to room, adjusting drips, offering comfort, whispering reassurances that felt more like prayers than words. Families sat close to bedsides, holding hands, watching monitors, counting breaths. Some cried openly. Others sat in silence, already grieving someone who was still breathing. I remember thinking, I'm more tired than I've ever been. Not the kind of tired that sleep fixes. The kind that settles deeper into the chest, into the spirit. Around midnight, one of the aides, Mark, leaned against the doorway of the nurses' station and said, "Rebecca, we've got another decline in room 214. Blood pressure's dropping fast." I nodded, already moving. As I walked down the corridor, I felt something shift. Not physically at first, but internally. A subtle heaviness, as though the air itself had thickened. I paused for just a second, my hand resting on the wall. Something's different tonight, I thought. I didn't say it out loud. Nurses learn quickly which thoughts to ignore. Inside room 214, the lights were low. An elderly woman lay curled beneath white sheets, her daughter seated beside her, whispering something I couldn't hear. I checked the monitor, adjusted her oxygen, and offered the daughter a gentle nod. She mouthed thank you without looking up. When I stepped back into the hallway, a wave of dizziness washed over me. Passed quickly, or so I told myself. I blamed dehydration. Stress. Too much coffee, not enough food. All the usual culprits. I took a sip of water at the nurse's station and leaned forward, resting my hands on the counter. "Rebecca, you okay?" Mark asked. "Yeah," I said. "Just need a second." But seconds have a way of stretching when they don't belong to time anymore. The fluorescent lights above me seemed suddenly too bright. Sounds blurred together. Distant footsteps, murmured voices, the soft beeping of monitors down the hall. I felt a pressure in my chest, not pain, but a strange inward pull, as if gravity had quietly changed its direction. I tried to inhale. The air felt thin. I remember thinking, this isn't right. The floor seemed to tilt, though I never felt myself fall. There was no dramatic collapse, no panic. Just a gentle fading, like a radio being slowly turned down. Mark called my name. "Rebecca." His voice sounded far away, muffled, as though I were underwater. I wanted to answer. I wanted to reassure him that I was fine, that I'd be back in a moment. But my body no longer responded. The last thing I saw was the glow of the hallway lights dissolving into something softer, warmer. A color I didn't have a name for yet. And then very suddenly the noise of the world let go of me. That was the moment everything I believed about life, faith, and what comes after began to unfold. And that is where this story truly starts. There was no darkness when consciousness returned. That was the first thing that surprised me. I had always assumed that losing consciousness would feel like falling asleep. A sudden blankness, a void. But what came instead was clarity. Not sharp or startling, but gentle, as if awareness itself had softened its edges. I became aware of stillness. Not silence exactly, but the absence of urgency. The constant background tension I carried. The weight of responsibility, schedules, alarms, outcomes, was simply gone. In its place was a quiet presence, steady and patient. I realized I could think. My thoughts weren't racing. They weren't fragmented. They arrived whole, complete, as if they no longer had to push their way through fear or fatigue. Am I dreaming? I wondered. But even as the question formed, I knew the answer wasn't that simple. Dreams had always been hazy for me, inconsistent. This felt different. This felt more real than waking life. Then I noticed something else. I wasn't inside my body. The realization didn't come with shock or panic. It arrived the way truth often does, softly, unmistakably. I felt no weight, no limbs, no heartbeat. Yet somehow I was more present than I had ever been. A subtle shift occurred, like a curtain being drawn back. And suddenly I could see. Below me was the hospice unit. I was hovering near the ceiling of the corridor, looking down at a scene I knew intimately. The nurse's station, the muted lights, the familiar pattern on the floor tiles. Everything looked exactly as it should have, and yet completely foreign. There I was. My body lay on the floor near the counter, Mark kneeling beside me, his hands shaking as he checked for a pulse. Another nurse was already calling for help, her voice tight with urgency. "Rebecca, stay with us," someone said. I heard my name clearly now, not through ears but through something deeper. I wanted to respond. I wanted to tell them I was okay. But the desire to speak felt unnecessary. I wasn't afraid. That realization startled me more than anything else. If I were watching this scene from a distance on a screen, I would expect panic, terror, resistance. Instead, I felt a deep, unshakable calm. Not indifference. Compassion. I felt Mark's fear as if it brushed against me, warm and sharp. I felt the tension in the room, the urgency of hands moving quickly, the silent prayers rising from somewhere just beyond the door. Each emotion seemed to ripple outward, visible in a way I had never perceived before. Thoughts had texture. Fear felt jagged. Love felt smooth and luminous. Concern carried weight, but prayer moved differently. It didn't press downward. It rose. As more staff arrived, the hallway filled with motion. Someone slid a gurney beneath my body. Someone else called out vitals. I watched as they worked with practiced precision, doing exactly what I had done for others so many times before. Only now I was on the other side. I noticed something that made my awareness widen. The room wasn't just filled with people. It was filled with intention. Every movement, every word, every silent hope created a faint glow, overlapping and interweaving. The space itself seemed alive, responding to what the hearts within it carried. The brighter the compassion, the stronger the light. I had spent years believing reality was limited to what we could measure. Standing there, or floating perhaps, I understood how incomplete that belief had been. A gentle sensation wrapped around me then. It wasn't a hand. It wasn't a voice. It was a presence, intelligent, warm, unmistakably aware of me. It didn't startle me. It felt familiar, like something I had always known but forgotten. "You are safe." The message didn't arrive as words, yet I understood it perfectly. I felt myself being drawn upward, not abruptly, but with the ease of being carried by water. The scene below softened, its edges blurring as if I were moving out of focus. I took one last look at the hospice corridor. At the nurses rushing to save a body I no longer occupied. At the people who loved and cared and tried their best with the tools they had. At a world so loud with worry, yet so rich with unseen grace. I didn't feel like I was leaving life behind. I felt like I was being invited deeper into it. The ceiling dissolved into light. And with that, the sense of direction changed entirely. I was no longer hovering above a place. I was moving toward something. Something waiting. And though I couldn't yet see it clearly, I knew, with a certainty that bypassed logic, that whatever lay ahead was not there to judge me. It was there to reveal me. The movement didn't feel like traveling. There was no wind, no sensation of speed, no sense of distance being crossed. It was more like awareness expanding, as if I were remembering a place rather than arriving at one. Light surrounded me. Not a blinding brightness, not something that forced my eyes closed. This light felt alive, gentle, layered, intelligent. It held depth the way water does, shifting in tone and warmth, responding to thought itself. There was no tunnel. No darkness. Only a gradual unfolding, as though layers of reality were being peeled back one by one. Time no longer behaved the way I knew it. I couldn't have said whether moments were passing or if everything was happening at once. Yet nothing felt rushed. Everything felt intentional. Perfectly paced. I realized then that I wasn't breathing. The thought should have frightened me. Instead, it felt irrelevant. I was more alive than I had ever been. Every part of my awareness felt sharpened and softened at the same time. My thoughts were clear, but they didn't echo with doubt. My emotions were present but free of heaviness. Fear, which had always lived quietly beneath my daily life, was completely absent. I whispered, or perhaps simply intended, a question. Is this death? The response came immediately. Not from a direction, not from a mouth, but from within the light itself. No. This is the space between. The words didn't arrive with drama. They carried reassurance, familiarity. As if someone patient were answering a child who had asked too soon. I sensed a presence closer now. Still not a form. Not a figure. More like light that knew me. Light that wasn't observing from a distance but participating, thinking with me, feeling through me. Memories began to surface. Not in fragments, not as flashes, but as living moments. I didn't merely see them. I entered them. I was 5 years old again, sitting on the front steps of my childhood home, waiting for my mother to come back from work. I felt the small ache of loneliness in my chest, not painful, just tender. Then I was older, in nursing school, sitting alone in my car after a 12-hour shift, crying because I felt inadequate, convinced I would never be strong enough for this calling. I saw nights in the hospice unit when I stayed longer than required, holding a stranger's hand simply because no one else could. I felt the weight of exhaustion, but also the quiet satisfaction that came from choosing presence over comfort. Each memory carried color. Acts of compassion glowed with a warm, golden light. Not blinding, not showy, steady and deep. Moments when I rushed, judged, or withdrew into impatience appeared muted, pale, almost gray. But what struck me most was this. There was no condemnation. The gray moments weren't rejected. They weren't erased. They were being healed, gently, like wounds exposed to air after too long in the dark. I felt a swell of emotion I didn't have words for. Regret, gratitude, humility, all braided together. Then the presence spoke again. You have spent your life tending to bodies, it said. Now let me show you how souls are tended. If I had still possessed a physical body, I would have been weeping. The love contained in that voice, if voice is even the right word, was unlike anything I had known. It wasn't distant or majestic. It was intimate. Personal. It knew every hidden fear, every small act of kindness I had forgotten, every moment I thought didn't matter. And yet none of it was held against me. I understood then that nothing done in love is ever lost. As my awareness widened, I became conscious of others. Not crowds. Not faces yet. But presences, gentle, familiar. They felt like echoes of people I had known in my work. Patients who had passed quietly. Those whose hands I had held at the edge of life. They didn't speak with mouths. They recognized me. A sense of belonging washed over me, deeper than comfort. It wasn't excitement. It was home, but not a place. State of being. One presence conveyed a simple truth. You did well. But your work is not finished. The realization settled into me without resistance. Somehow I already knew this wasn't where I would stay. Ahead the light began to gather. Not abruptly. Not forcefully. It drew inward, condensing into something more focused, more intentional. The warmth intensified, not in brightness but in depth. I felt drawn toward it. Not pulled. Invited. I hesitated, not out of fear but out of awareness. If I went further, would I return? The presence answered before the question fully formed. You will understand soon. Trust came easily then. I allowed myself to move forward, carried not by force, but by something far stronger. Love. And as the light ahead began to take shape, I sensed, with absolute certainty, that I was about to encounter the source of it all. As I moved closer, the light did not overwhelm me. It clarified me. Every part of my awareness felt gently aligned, as though I were finally seeing without distortion. The closer I came, the more I sensed that this light was not separate from truth. It was truth. Not an idea, not a concept, but something living and personal. Then, without transition, I was no longer moving toward the light. I was standing within it. And for the first time, the presence became unmistakably personal. He was there. Not as an image pulled from paintings or stained glass. Not as a figure shaped by culture or imagination. He was more real than form itself. The light did not surround him. It belonged to him the way warmth belongs to fire. I didn't need to ask who he was. My soul recognized him before my thoughts could. Jesus, I whispered. He smiled. It wasn't a physical expression the way we understand smiles, but something deeper. as if joy itself had turned its attention toward me. The entire space seemed to soften in response. He spoke my name. Rebecca. Hearing it spoken that way, not aloud yet perfectly clear, felt like being found after a long journey. Every place in me that had felt unseen, overlooked, or quietly weary came to rest. I felt the urge to kneel, to bow, to do something that expressed reverence. But there was no need. Humility here was not an action. It was a state of being fully known and fully loved at the same time. He looked into me, not at me, not through me, but into me, and in that gaze, every layer I had built to survive dissolved. The competence, the self-criticism, the constant measuring of worth by usefulness, all of it fell away. You have served where few notice, he said. You have poured from emptiness and called it duty. The words didn't accuse. They acknowledged. I felt understood in a way I had never experienced, not just for what I had done but for what it had cost me. You were never meant to heal alone, he continued. And you were never meant to forget who you are while helping others remember who they are. Emotion rose in me, vast and uncontained. If I had still possessed a body, it would have been trembling. I tried to speak, to respond, to explain, but words felt unnecessary and inadequate. He raised his hand gently, not to silence me but to steady me. I have something to show you, he said. Not to frighten you but to prepare you. The space around us began to change. The light expanded, unfolding outward like a horizon. I sensed time loosening its grip, stretching and bending until past, present, and future existed side by side. Not as chaos but as harmony. Before us appeared the earth. Not as a distant sphere floating in emptiness, but as something alive. It breathed. It pulsed. Light and shadow moved across its surface in slow rhythms, shaped by the thoughts, prayers, and intentions of those who lived upon it. Cities shimmered like constellations. Not with electricity alone but with emotion. I saw homes lit by quiet devotion. People praying alone in kitchens, beside hospital beds, in cars parked after long days. I saw others glowing with unrest, arguments spilling across screens, fear amplifying itself through endless noise. Jesus stood beside me, his presence steady, untroubled. Watch closely, he said. The future is already stirring. As I observed, waves of energy moved across nations, not borders on a map, but currents shaped by belief, pride, humility, compassion, and fear. I noticed something then. The strongest forces were not speeches. They were not laws. They were hearts. Truth travels faster than sound, Jesus said. That is why many hear but few listen. I felt the weight of his words settle into me. I wanted to ask what was coming. I wanted names, outcomes, certainty. Instead, he gestured gently toward the world below. What lies ahead is not only about power, he said. It is about posture. Scenes began to shift before us. Moments unfolding, overlapping, converging. I saw leaders rising into focus, watched closely by millions. Their words created ripples far beyond their intentions. One figure began to draw the light around him more intensely than the others. I felt it before I recognized him. A familiar presence, surrounded by tension and expectation. The world will watch this one again, Jesus said calmly. But not for the reasons they expect. My awareness sharpened. I knew we were approaching something significant. Not a spectacle. A choice. And I understood then, whatever he was about to reveal was not meant to feed curiosity or fear. It was meant to call hearts back to what endures. Love, faith, and the quiet strength of prayer. The light shifted once more. And the vision deepened. The image before us grew clearer, more focused. I saw the world not as headlines or breaking news, but as a living network of choices. Every decision, whispered or shouted, hidden or public, sent currents through the fabric of reality. Some currents strengthened the light. Others distorted it. Jesus remained beside me, calm and attentive as though nothing unfolding surprised him. I watched gatherings form across the globe. Some were loud, charged with emotion, driven by urgency and anger. Others were quiet. A few people sitting in living rooms, small churches, hospital chapels, hands folded, heads bowed. The quiet ones glowed longer. Their light did not flare. It endured. Then the image shifted again. A single figure stood at the center of converging currents. I recognized him instantly. Donald Trump. I didn't feel shock at seeing him there. Instead, I felt the weight of symbolism. He wasn't shown as a caricature or a hero, but as a man carrying something heavy: influence, expectation, contradiction. Jesus spoke, his voice steady. He carries both a storm and a seed. The words settled slowly. The world sees the storm, he continued. Heaven watches the seed. The vision drew closer. I saw Trump not on a stage, not behind microphones, but alone, older, quieter, stripped of noise. He walked through a still place, his posture burdened, reflective. This coming season will test more than leadership, Jesus said. It will test humility. I felt a date forming in my awareness before I heard it spoken. 2027, he said. Not as an ending but as a revealing. The number shimmered briefly, not like a prediction etched in stone, but like a doorway. I sensed its weight without understanding every detail. This year will not ask who wins, Jesus continued. It will ask who listens. Below us, I saw the nation of America pulsing like a single heart, half bright with hope, half dimmed by fear and pride. The division wasn't geographical. It ran through households, friendships, churches, even private thoughts. Jesus placed his hand gently on my shoulder. Do not mistake volume for authority, he said. And do not mistake conflict for collapse. Scenes unfolded rapidly now. I saw waves of voices online, screens glowing in dark rooms, people consuming endless arguments without rest. I saw anger passed from person to person like a contagion. But beneath it all, quieter streams moved. Prayers whispered late at night, forgiveness offered without witnesses, people choosing restraint where retaliation would have been easier. Those moments strengthened the light. At the center of it all, Trump stood again, now surrounded by two distinct currents. One was bright, steady, rooted in humility. The other burned red, fast and volatile, pulsing with ambition. He will be given a choice, Jesus said. Not between success and failure, but between being a symbol and being a servant. I leaned forward, drawn in. What will he choose? I asked softly. Jesus did not answer directly. How he chooses, he said instead, will reflect what the people value. I saw Trump look upward, his face marked by something unfamiliar. Not defiance, not confidence, but awareness. A tear traced its way down his cheek. It wasn't weakness. It was recognition. It is not about politics, Jesus said. It is about posture. The vision widened again. Trump was no longer alone. I saw others rising quietly alongside him. Not celebrities, not career leaders, but ordinary people. Mothers, teachers, nurses, farmers, young men and women who had never stood on a stage, yet carried a steady light within them. The shift will not come from power, Jesus said. It will come from prayer. I watched as small groups gathered, some in homes, some in hospitals, some in forgotten corners of cities. They prayed not for dominance but for clarity. Not for victory but for peace. Light spread from these places slowly like dawn. This is not a political awakening, Jesus said. It is a spiritual one. I felt the truth of it resonate deeply. Two paths appeared before us, stretching across the vision like living threads. One was loud, bright, fast-moving, fueled by pride, urgency, applause. The other was quieter, softer, slower, woven with patience, mercy, and faith. Both paths will appear convincing, Jesus said. But only one leads to peace. The paths converged at a single point. There once more Trump stood, not elevated, not exalted, but still. Waiting. He is not alone in this choice, Jesus said. Every heart watching him is choosing too. The question echoed through me not as judgment but as invitation. Will they follow noise, he asked. Or will they nurture truth? The vision began to soften. But the meaning remained sharp. Power without love fractures. Influence without humility exhausts. Faith without prayer becomes noise. And I understood then, what was being revealed was not the fate of one man or one nation. It was the condition of the human heart. And the light was still waiting for an answer. The light around us began to shift again, not fading but deepening, as though the vision had said what it needed to say and was now preparing me to carry it back. Jesus turned his attention from the world to me. Rebecca, he said gently, what you have seen is not meant to burden you. I felt a tightening in my awareness, not fear but reluctance. I didn't want to leave this clarity. I didn't want to return to a world that felt so heavy compared to this peace. There is so much brokenness, I said. So much confusion. He nodded, not dismissing the weight of it. And yet, he replied, there is more light than you realize. The scene before us changed once more. I saw hospitals, not just the one I worked in but many. Rooms where people lay frightened, uncertain, clinging to life or preparing to release it. I saw nurses moving quietly between beds, exhausted but attentive. Doctors pausing for a moment longer than required. Caregivers whispering prayers they weren't sure anyone heard. These, Jesus said, are my hidden healers. Light rose from their actions, not dramatic, not visible to the world but steady and faithful. A nurse adjusting a blanket. A caregiver listening without interrupting. A hand held in silence. Each act sent ripples outward, touching places far beyond the room where it occurred. While the world watches power, he continued, heaven watches love. The vision widened. I saw families reconciling after years of distance. Words of forgiveness spoken hesitantly at first, then with relief. I saw strangers helping one another without recording it, without expecting recognition. I saw teachers staying late, mentors choosing patience, parents choosing gentleness where frustration once lived. These moments glowed brighter than cities. These are the true architects of peace, Jesus said. I felt something settle deeply within me. A knowing that influence had nothing to do with platforms or popularity. It had everything to do with presence. Then he looked at me again, his expression both tender and resolute. You are one of them, he said. I felt unworthy of the words, yet unable to deny their truth. Every life you have touched, he continued. Every moment you chose compassion when no one was watching. None of it disappeared. A warmth spread through me, anchoring itself where exhaustion had once lived. Love leaves a trace, he said. And light recognizes it. The vision shifted one final time. I saw myself returning, not as a spectacle, not as a messenger shouting warnings, but as someone changed quietly at the core. I saw myself moving through familiar hallways again, noticing things I had once rushed past. I saw patients respond not to words but to presence. You will not return to explain everything, Jesus said. You will return to embody what matters. The thought humbled me. What should I tell them? I asked. How will they understand? Jesus placed his hand over my heart. Tell them not to fear what they do not understand, he said. Tell them that prayer is not escape but alignment. The light around us began to draw inward. Remind them, he continued, that salvation does not come through control but through surrender. I felt movement again, the gentle sensation of being carried not away from him but outward. The years ahead will test humanity's ability to remain loving amid noise, he said. And that includes you. The words held no threat. Only truth. Go back, Jesus said softly. Carry light into ordinary places. Heal through presence. Love without condition. As the light folded around me, one final truth echoed through my awareness. Steady, unshakable, eternal. The future is not secured by power, he said. It is sustained by faith. And with that, the peace that had held me so completely began to guide me home. The return was not sudden. It unfolded the way waking from a deep, meaningful sleep does. Gently, reluctantly, with awareness arriving before sensation. At first there was sound. A distant rhythm, steady and insistent. A beeping that felt unfamiliar, then slowly recognizable. Voices overlapped, muffled at first, then clearer. She's stabilizing. Blood pressure's coming back. I felt weight return. Heavy. Dense. Limiting. My chest rose sharply as air filled my lungs, burning slightly as it reminded me how breathing worked. Light pressed against my eyes, harsh, fluorescent, nothing like the living radiance I had just left. I opened my eyes. The ceiling above me was plain. White. So, for a moment I didn't move. I didn't speak. I couldn't. Not because I was weak, but because part of me was still listening to a deeper silence beneath the noise. Mark's face appeared in my field of vision, pale, relieved, his eyes shining. Someone squeezed my hand. Another voice whispered, "Welcome back." But the word carried more meaning than anyone in that room could have known. In the days that followed, doctors explained what they could measure. A sudden reaction. Extreme exhaustion. A narrow window where things could have gone very differently. Charts were reviewed. Conclusions were made. I listened politely. But I knew the truth didn't live on paper. When I returned home after being discharged, the world looked the same, and entirely different. Trees seemed more present. Ordinary sounds carried depth. Human faces held layers I had never noticed before. It was as if reality had always been speaking softly, and I had finally learned how to listen. I didn't rush to tell my story. Some experiences need time to settle, like sediment in still water. I carried it quietly, letting it shape the way I moved through life instead of turning it into noise. I returned to work. The hospice halls felt familiar, but my pace changed. I no longer hurried through moments. I stood longer at doorways. I listened without planning my next task. I prayed silently, not loudly, not dramatically, but sincerely. I watched fear soften in patients' eyes when someone truly saw them. I watched peace enter rooms where nothing else had changed. I understood then what Jesus had meant. Miracles are not interruptions of nature. They are awakenings within it. One evening, weeks later, while journaling in silence, I felt that same stillness return. Not the vision, not the light, but the presence. It didn't speak in sentences. It whispered a simple truth. Begin with love where you stand. That was the message. Not prediction. Not spectacle. Preparation. I realized then that what I had been shown about the years ahead was never about fear. It was about posture. About who we become when influence rises again, when noise grows louder, when division feels easier than compassion. Salvation does not arrive through control. It arrives through faith. Through prayer. Through love rooted in God, not circumstance. If you are listening to this now, I don't believe it is by accident. I am not asking you to accept my experience as proof of anything. I am asking you to notice what already stirs within you. The quiet knowing that love is stronger than fear and prayer is more powerful than noise. The coming years will not test how loud humanity can be. They will test how loving. Whether we choose humility over pride, faith over frenzy, prayer over panic. The world will look to leaders, but heaven looks to hearts. And hearts are shaped in silence. If this story resonated with you, if it reminded you of something you had almost forgotten, I invite you to stay connected. Stories like this are shared here not to persuade but to remember. You are welcome to subscribe to Timeless Religious Stories, a place where faith is spoken gently, where love is the message, and where eternity is never far from the ordinary. I am Rebecca Hale. This was not a warning. It was a reminder that heaven is closer than we think, that prayer still shapes the future, and that love, rooted in God, remains the greatest power the world has ever known.